Welcome back. Some good news for taxpayers. Refunds are now trending higher. New data from the IRS shows the size of the average refund through the first 4 weeks of the tax season is now up 1.3% from the same period in 2018. But will the trend hold, especially with the new tax laws? Let's ask Mattie Duppler. She's with the National Taxpayers Union. And let's ask CNBC's senior personal finance correspondent Sharon Epperson. Welcome to you, Sharon. Yep. Mattie, let me just start top level here. What are the numbers telling us, and why has this been so all over the place?
Right. So the latest data that we saw come out of Treasury yesterday was that the average tax refund is up 1.3% from last year. Might not sound like a lot, but if you've been listening to the news, you've heard over the last several weeks since the beginning of tax filing season at the end of February that tax refunds were down. Now, there's a number of reasons for this change. One is the fact that we got a slow start to tax season because of that government shutdown. The IRS, of course, is one of the agencies that was shut down. That means they couldn't answer phones, they couldn't field questions, they couldn't continue a lot of the business of the tax filing season. So we're still actually about 2 million tax files short of what we saw last year because people are still either waiting to file that tax return, or in some cases, some states are still working on conformity measures because of the big tax changes in 2017. You've got enrolled agents in some of these states who are still asking for clarity for some of their tax filers on state-specific questions.
Wow. Sharon, in the meantime, if you're in one of the states, Northeast California, where you're affected by the state and local deduction cap, explain how are those states just harder hit by the refund issue? Because we know anecdotally that's certainly happening around here.
Well, it's definitely happening. People are, if you're in a high tax state, you have a high property tax, that $10,000 cap on state and local tax deductions, it may be significant for you, but keep in mind also that there are other changes, so many changes to the tax code, and one of them with the alternative minimum tax should be noted that a lot of people in these high tax states may be high income taxpayers as well, but they may be the middle to high income taxpayers and now not have to pay AMT. And so that AMT used to, you know, if you had state and local tax deductions, that would put you into AMT. Now you're not in AMT, so you still may be getting a little bit of a break with at least being able to take that deduction.
Right. Now, again, the topic here is not about the rates themselves. We know the rates went down. I'm just curious what's happening with the refunds, which a lot of people kind of plan and depend on.
So a very important thing.
And how the withholding has affected all of that.
Yeah, the withholding is important too, but it's important to point out that the change in the refund amounts and the change in the number of refunds, as Mattie said, has to do with the timing and the fact in particular of two key tax credits that are key for refunds, and that is the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. And so the fact that those are now just being able to be processed because you couldn't claim them until February 15th, that's just now taking effect. That's going to change the week-to-week data and the year-over-year data. So we have to not overinterpret where we are. What we need to interpret, though, if you're not getting the refund you expected or you owe, you just want to know why the heck that happened.
Right.
And a big reason is that you may not have changed your withholding. They also, under the tax code, changed the withholding table. So if you're not having the government take out the proper amount out of your paycheck, the companies have now lowered the amount.
You're fixing it.
You're fixing
now.
it. You should be fixing it now. And there's some key steps that you can take to do that.
And we're showing some of those there about how to look at your paycheck for that. So, Mattie, where does this leave us in terms of the tax revenues that are or aren't going to the federal government? I would also think if the refunds end up pacing ahead for the year, probably good for the economy. Do you think we're going to end up higher year on year?
Right. Well, Morgan Stanley, of course, said that we were going to end up tens of billions of dollars higher than we did last year. It's still too soon to tell, but that point that Sharon made about timing is really important. The profile of a taxpayer who is getting a check now is someone who gets a majority of their income back vis-a-vis the earned income tax credit. There's expanded eligibility for the child tax credit as well as the additional child tax credit. There's a lot of those refundability measures for people who even had this money coming back to them because their liability is above what they owed to the IRS. And those are the types of taxpayers who are now just getting that refund because the IRS is not allowed by law to start processing those until February 15th. So I think that we'll continue to see this data tick up as returns start to come in. Like I said, that government shutdown really delayed a lot of the activity that we would see up until this point. So it's going to be it's going to be a long road until we get to the end of filing season before we see the end of the story.
Mattie, a final question to you then. So are we seeing just a more uneven distribution in terms of what's happening with refunds, where they might be higher for some parts of the population, lower for others, like we talked about, because of withholding issues? Are there any implications we can take away in terms of how that will ripple through the economy?
I think it'll be interesting to look at this data when we're at the end of the season. I think that AMT point that was raised before is so important. 5 million people who were stuck in the AMT before, which effectively meant that their SALT deduction was zero, now have access to a $10,000 SALT deduction. That is not someone who is the richest of the rich. That's someone who's mid to upper class, who has not had the ability to take that deduction before. I think that certainly could show up in consumer data, because that's the kind of taxpayer that may not necessarily save that kind of tax refund. They may spend it.
Yeah. All right, guys, thank you. Good stuff. Mattie
Thank you.
Duppler, Sharon Epperson helping to explain this one for us. A lot of focus on Tesla's Elon Musk today, which we'll talk about later on. It's overshadowing a key test for his other company, SpaceX, that is scheduled for later tonight. Our Morgan